This woman had the wedding she had dreamed of since she was a little kid. However, she would never have expected her wedding to be rudely interrupted by a homeless man. When the woman took a closer look at the man who grabbed the microphone, she suddenly burst into tears. Homeless man grabs microphone at wedding, bride bursts into tears. Christy was sunken so deep in her thoughts, she almost hadn't realized she had reached the platform for the ceremony. She stepped up on the podium and looked out. From here, she had a nice view of the whole location inside the park. Then something in the distance caught her eye. In the distance, but not too far away, was a figure. It looked like a homeless man was looking at the wedding grounds. Christy, this could have happened as the wedding took place in a public park. Although the marriage was by invitation only, she knew the park was also inhabited by homeless people. It was somewhat off-putting that a homeless man was watching the wedding, but he wasn't that close. So Christy tried to put that thought out of her mind as she had enough going on, but every time she looked, he was staring in their direction. It made her feel increasingly uncomfortable. Her mind was quickly taken off the homeless man as she saw the first guests arrive. She then realized how late it was and how much she still had to do. Christy got ready for the wedding, excited that it was just moments away from starting, but it would turn out different than expected. Not much later, she walked down the aisle with her father beside her toward the man of her dreams. Once she got to the podium, she could see every person who was important to her was there. Christy couldn't help but feel relieved when she noticed the homeless man wasn't in the same spot anymore. Once the ceremony started, it was like she was dreaming. Everything happened as planned and was even more fantastic than she could have imagined. But then she suddenly noticed the homeless man again standing near the flower arrangements at the far side of the location. Why was this man coming closer? She hadn't noticed him because he was quite a bit closer than before and closer than all the other people in the park. During the ceremony, she had seen quite a few people around the location watching and pointing, but he was nowhere to be seen. And now he showed up near the location. Even though she was still very much enjoying her wedding, Christy's mind kept returning to the homeless man. Although she was all the way in the front, she could still see him when she turned around. And every time she did, she noticed that he had moved a little bit closer. Slowly but surely, the ceremony came closer to the end. During the ceremony, the homeless man started to bother her. A nervous feeling came over her. Why did he come closer? Every other person in the park just watched for a while and continued on their way. Why was he looking so intently? Once the ceremony concluded, all the guests could leave their seats and personally congratulate the married couple. When a close friend of Christy came by to congratulate her, she thanked him and told him about the homeless man. As Christy pointed the man out, she noticed he was almost inside the wedding location. As she expected, her friend understood her worry, and it didn't take long for him to approach the homeless man and ask him to leave. Christy watched intriguingly from a distance. She couldn't determine what they were saying, but was sure her friend could handle the situation for her. Until Christy kept watching the two men. She had thought it wouldn't take her friend too long to see the homeless man off, but it looked as if he didn't want to go. The homeless man waved his hands and purposely pointed at Christy this time, which made her jump a little. What do you want? Her friend put a hand on the man's shoulder and looked at him directly. The homeless man was clearly getting upset, pushing the hand off his shoulder. After some talk, her friend seemed to succeed in de-escalating the situation. The homeless man gave up, shrugged his shoulders, and walked away. Christy's heart leaped from relief, and she hugged her friend when he got back to her. Her friend explained that he didn't fully understand the man, so he had difficulty explaining that he had to leave. The man kept interrupting him, but there was no need to worry anymore. At least that's what they thought. Now that the man was gone and the ceremony was over, Christy thought she could enjoy her day now. She looked back at the spot where she saw the homeless man this morning, but he didn't return there. It was nice to see he was gone, but she still had a weird feeling about it. But Christy was confident enough to go on with the day. She and her husband walked to the front under loud applause and sat down in front of the crowd. It was time for the best man's speech. As the best man walked toward to the stage, Christy saw something that made her heart stop. As Dave, the best man, took the microphone and started to say his first words, Christy saw something that caught her attention. She noticed some movement behind the platform, but how was this possible? Nothing or no one should have been able to be there, but then she realized what it was. As a shock of worry ran through Christy, she realized that the homeless man was coming out from behind the platform. He was making his way up the stage now. Dave was continuing his speech passionately, and the crowd was laughing at his joke. That's when things took a turn. Her husband was tearing up from the best man speech, and it took some time until Christy finally got his attention. She felt terrible interrupting this moment, but she had no other option. But when she whispered to her husband and wanted to point him out, the homeless was trying to get the microphone. Everyone in the crowd held their breath while they watched the confusion unfold before their eyes. The best man was bewildered by the sudden appearance of a homeless man on the stage and tried his best to make him leave. The homeless man seemed keen to take over the microphone. Security, someone yelled. 2 security guards joined the 2 men on the stage, after which it appeared that the homeless man gave up and came along quietly. He stepped back without a struggle and joined the security guards in leaving the stage. A wave of relief went through the crowd, but nobody expecting what would happen next. Before completely turning the corner and disappearing behind the changing rooms, the homeless man suddenly turned around and yelled something. Congratulations, Christy Bennett. Everyone was stunned, and Christy was nailed to the floor. Questions flew through her head. What had just happened? Who was this man? How did he know her maiden name? For a few moments, Christy didn't know what to do. She was shocked, but also curious due to the questions in her head. Slowly but surely, the shock drifted away, and she started to realize something. That voice, that way of speaking. Did she recognize it? It sounded very familiar in a way. Intrigued by this thought, she needed to find out exactly who the man was that called her name. She looked over to the changing rooms where the security guards had taken him. To Christy's surprise, she felt somewhat relieved when she saw him standing there. Without giving it more thought, she walked toward them. Her husband noticed how she looked at the homeless man and started walking toward him. After a few steps, Christy felt a hand on her shoulder, and when she turned around, she saw it belonged to her husband. "What are you doing?" he asked. She explained to him that she recognized the voice. After she explained the situation to her husband, he let her take a look. The homeless man was with security guards, so what could go wrong? Christy got closer and closer, but still couldn't recognize who the man was. He was very unkempt and wore dirty old clothes, what had this day turned into. "I'm sorry, but who are you? How do you know my name?" Christy asked. A big smile appeared on the man's face. "It sure has been a long time. Don't you recognize me?" Christy suddenly felt overwhelmed by emotions. At once, it struck her. Memories hit her like waves, and she suddenly burst into tears. The sounds of her sobs alerted her husband, who came running. He did his best to comfort her, asking what had happened while glaring at the homeless man. "What did you do?" His anger shone through in his voice. Christy grabbed his arm, told him to stop. "It's all right, dear." She embraced her husband, told him not to worry. After wiping away her tears, her facial expression suddenly changed, as did the tone of her voice. "How is this possible? How are you homeless? What happened?" Everyone gathered around them slowly, but with every question Christy asked, they became more confused. Her husband had now reached his boiling point and couldn't hold it anymore. He demanded to know what was going on. Did she know this man? And if so, who was it? Christy looked at the homeless man, who nodded as if he permitted her to tell them. She took a deep breath. "This is Mr. Diaz. He was my favorite teacher." Before anyone could react, she turned back to Mr. Diaz and confronted him by repeating the questions she had asked him. Both confused and excited about his sudden appearance at the wedding, she added another question. "What are you doing here?" The teacher looked at Christy, and she thought she could see his eyes tear up behind his dirty hair, but she wasn't sure. Mr. Diaz took a deep breath and then started to speak. He felt a little uncomfortable because there were a lot of people gathered around him, but he explained everything. He told them his life story, how he met his wife and knew Christy. After Christy had left his school, his life had taken a wrong turn. His wife became very sick and passed away after a short sickbed. Not much later, he got fired and couldn't pay his rent anymore. There was one detail he left out of his story, though, but Christy had noticed it. She had asked him why he was here in this park and at the wedding, and he had yet to answer. She felt terrible for him and would have never guessed the answer he had for her. Christy was shocked when she heard her favorite teacher was living in the park she so often visited, but she was about to get another surprise. Mr. Diaz had recognized her immediately that morning and wanted to congratulate her. From that moment on, he had been preparing a speech he wanted to give. Mr. Diaz suddenly saw the irony in his plan as he realized how it had looked for Christy when he suddenly appeared and tried to speak. He humbly apologizes for the intrusion and for creating chaos and confusion during the formalities. Christy smiled, told him there was no need for apologies, and then surprised everyone. Christy told everyone to go back to their seats. There was a moment of silence as everyone was surprised by this announcement. She repeated herself and urged everyone on. Slowly but surely, everyone returned to their seat. curious about what would happen. Christy then smiled and handed Mr. Diaz the microphone. You should speak. You worked on it the whole day. She said her husband was still standing beside her, surprised by this sudden change of plans. Christy had been planning this day forever, and now she suddenly changed something on the spot. This man must mean a lot to her. Mr. Diaz didn't know how to react. This was all he had been hoping for all day. Christy and her husband returned to their seat as he looked out over the crowd. As a teacher, he was used to talking to big groups, but it had been a long time. Nobody expected what happened next. Everyone watched how an unkempt man walked on the stage. No one expected much, but that all changed when he opened his mouth. During the day, Mr. Diaz had written an incredible speech, talking about how wonderful Christy is and how her husband should treasure her. In the end, everyone was wiping away their tears. An overwhelming applause was heard throughout the entire park. Mr. Diaz stood on the podium, shocked by this incredible reception. He had never expected this. Moments later, he was embraced even though he hadn't showered in a long time. It was Christy. Tears were rolling down her face. I'm so sorry, she said. Mr. Diaz was baffled. Why was Christy apologizing? She had just fulfilled his wish to let him speak. She hadn't done anything wrong. Before he could ask, Christy spoke again. I'm so sorry. How can we help you? You can't keep living like this. This was the first time someone had offered to help him. Although Mr. Diaz was pleased Christy liked the speech, he wasn't sure about accepting her help. It wasn't at all what he had come to the wedding for. He was so pleased when he saw a familiar face and happy for Christy. But he soon realized now wasn't an answer question. Christy got what she wanted as Mr. Diaz accepted her help. So now that was agreed upon, it was time for the party to start. There'd been enough emotions throughout the day so she could use it to blow off some steam. But then she noticed something that made her angry. Between all the partying people, Christy saw someone trying to sneak off. It was Mr. Diaz. She made her way through the crowd and confronted him just in time. Christy was prepared to yell at him, but she noticed he was crying when he turned around. What was going on? Without a second thought, she grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him toward her. Where are you going? She said while hugging. Mr. Diaz told her he wanted to sneak off because he couldn't possibly accept her help. He would just be a burden to her. But then Christy said something. This isn't up for discussion. Christy's facial expression made it clear she wasn't joking. You helped me, so now I will help you. Afterward, she talked about her plan and how she wanted to help him. Mr. Diaz couldn't do anything but listen. They both didn't know where the plan would take them. After the wedding, Christy made Mr. Diaz promise to stay in touch. This meant they would meet at the park twice a week since he no longer had a phone. She could help him turn his life around and make positive changes, which would soon be starting to come to his life. First, they found him a temporary place to stay, after which it took little time for them to find a new teaching job. Slowly but surely, Mr. Diaz gained control over his life back. When he eventually found a permanent place, he invited Christy and her husband over to celebrate.